This is the Business Hour in partnership with Network B2B, helping you share your passion, knowledge, and make great connections.
Now, you may have heard the words not for profit, but have you heard the phrase plot to profit? Well, if you haven't, we're going to find out all about it now. I'm joined on the line by Brian and Andrew. Good afternoon to you. How are you both?
Good afternoon, Steve. Yes, very well. Thanks very much for asking.
So tell us about plot to profit then. What's it all about? Who would like to go first?
Okay, this is Brian. So plot to profit came about when we found a lot of people who had large gardens, primarily, that's how it started, who were looking to get planning consent to add significant value to their property by getting planning permission to develop land as an asset that they owned. And it just developed into a business model whereby that is exactly what we do. Now, we do end up with plots that are much bigger than one house in a garden. We've had plots as large as 96 homes come across our desk, but our primary objective is for people who own a house or a small plot of land who would like to realise its ultimate capital value and can do that through what we call planning gain, which is the gaining of planning permission to develop that plot.
So what's the process then? You know, if I was, I'm sat here, I've got a house, I've got a bit of land, or I think I've got a bit of land, and so what's the process? How does it all start?
Right, it's Andrew, Steve. So the process, in terms of how plot to profit works, is that at the very beginning we undertake what we offer as a free valuation service. So you would approach us and we would identify your land on a red line boundary so we could confirm ownership and lines. And from that, we would do an overview of what development we thought was achievable on the land. And we would run a series of numbers, which we call a development appraisal. This identifies costs associated with a future build, and that allows us to analyse what the plot will be worth by also understanding the end value of the particular plot. So what I mean by end value is the sales value if that house was to be built and sold to the open market. Once we've run and crunched the numbers, that gives us two figures which we offer or which we share with our clients, and that is the value of the land if it were to be sold to a developer, if you were to sell it to a developer once planning consent has been achieved. And the second option is if you wanted to actually build and construct the property of which we have planning consent for, what you would deliver at that outcome when you went to sell the house. So there's two different values and two different exit points: sell to a developer or build out and sell to the end purchaser.
Okay. And sorry, go on.
Yeah, once we've established viability and given you that report back, we also then move into a phase which we call our pre-planning appraisal phase, and that's a much more detailed piece of work where we do a thorough examination of local planning policy. We also do checks on the title deeds of the land to ensure that there's no covenant or any restrictions on the land which may prevent you from developing, because we could, in theory, achieve a planning consent, but if you have a covenant in place, you would never, ever be able to build out. So it's very important that we check that point in particular. And at the end of that process, we end up with a probability rating based on a whole lot of criteria we assess as to the likelihood of achieving planning consent. So that's a really good piece of work which we do for our clients, because it allows them to invest a small amount of money up front before they get into the next phase, which is then going on to apply for the full planning application.
And this is a way that they can create some financial freedom, probably, and be mortgage free, I guess, if this works really well for them. But Brian, what about, it's a thought that comes to my mind, what if they put something next door to me, is it likely to affect the value of my property? Because there I was with this nice piece of land and now I've got a house next door. What's the outcome of that likely to be?
Yes, that's an objection sometimes we do get. It's a very good question. And typically it has a very minimal impact. I couldn't say it has no impact, and it does vary as well. But there's two things. One, if a new purchaser is coming to buy that new house, they just see the development as it is now, so they don't see any sort of devalue. And if you're selling your house in the open market, the purchaser of that, or your existing property, also would just see the development as it is now. So it's more of an emotional thing from the existing owner like yourself, as in that example, where you see the change and therefore maybe the devalue, but not so much. Now, there is going to be a slight devalue in that you wouldn't have such a large garden potentially, with your house. Although there are upsides of that, having had a large garden. Might be a place to cut the lawns. But typically the significant increase in value far outweighs the decrease in value of the existing home, and that's the trade-off. But there is a potential for a slight negative financial impact. But it does come back to what you said there, Steve, about the motivation for doing this. And you're right, people are paying off mortgages earlier. They're making major contributions to things like their pension plan. Most people who come to us have some kind of strategy. A lot of people think we wanted to retire to the sun in Spain and are looking to sell up. And things like that, and therefore are looking at what's the maximum value they can get, and therefore they are intending to move out of the property, and therefore not so worried about what might be built next to them or whatever. Just they want to realise that's value.
So it's a way of creating, like we said, that financial freedom. What about you've got the permission, okay, and you're able to build, but you just decide not to, because there must be some extra value there if you're selling your property and you've got planning permission already. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, it certainly is, Steve. It does add value, and we have clients currently that are considering that option and following that strategy. So we've got the consent, and now they're selling the property, marketing their own property with the benefit of an additional plot to the side if the purchaser wishes to build out to that planning consent. So yeah, that it still does add value at that level as well.
And how long does that planning permission last for, or do they have to apply again after a certain period of time?
The planning permission itself lasts for 3 years from the date of decision as standard, and you can extend that period by one of two things. You can either demonstrate that you've made a meaningful start by digging a foundation, for example, on the plot, and obtaining a certificate from the local authority for them to agree that a meaningful start has commenced. If that is the case, then the permission lasts forever. So you can implement at whatever time thereafter. If you want to go back and apply for the consent to be renewed, there is a process to do that at the end of the 3 years. And typically, if that is the outcome, it is a lot easier to get the second application through because the precedent of development has already been agreed by the planning authority.
Okay, and you touched on about you've got the land, you can build, your developer could build. I guess if you self-build, there's potential to make even more financial freedom, isn't there?
Well, that's absolutely right, because if you are prepared to do that, that is where you see maximum benefit from the opportunity, because as you can imagine, if you can effectively build it at not much more than cost of some labour and materials, you're intrinsically adding the contractor's profit to your pot. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is, a self-build scenario is absolutely a great way forward. Another thing which I think is interesting, and we've had again with a couple of clients recently, they've been looking at this in a quite creative way. So they've had really nice pieces of land, some great views from it, but the house they're currently living in is not their dream house. So what they've said is, right, okay, we'll get consent to develop in the garden, we'll build our dream house in the garden, and we'll sell the front plot to fund our dream house. And we think that's a fantastic way of achieving your forever home.
What? I love that. That never crossed my mind, that one. But yeah, that's a great way. And Brian, is there what do you need for a decent sized plot to make this happen, really? Just, because there may be some people listen to this and go, well, I've got a big garden. And there may be the people that think, well, I wonder if my garden is really big enough. Is there a rule of thumb on this anywhere?
There are. Well, first of all, I'd say you'd be surprised what you can get on a plot of land. So probably most people underestimate the size of and value of the plot that they own. But there are limitations. And I'll get Andy just to talk about those in a moment. But I think what people, perhaps our listeners, ought to be aware is, as we said, the free viability and valuation assessment that we do right up front is to do just that. We do get a lot of rubbish come over our desk, I have to say. We've had terraced houses with a backyard, and people asked if there's the potential to build there. Well, only if you're prepared to have a very small house and let somebody drive through your lounge to get to it. There are some fundamental criteria like access to it and things like that. But from a building perspective,
yeah, I think in terms of a minimum size, just to give the listeners a real kind of indication, I would say a plot size, the smallest plot size that would be viable would be something like 30 metres long by 10 metres wide. It's not, as Brian says, you don't actually have to have a huge piece of land. You could make a piece of land of that size work for you. Obviously, it's a small development. Anything beyond that, yeah, absolutely, there's viability and possibility with plots over and above that size.
And another one that just came to my mind there. What about in areas of outstanding natural beauty? Do you come across certain challenges there?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I just asked because I live in one, so I thought we may have one or two. There may be. I mean, we've got some lovely houses not far from me. I could think of how they could actually probably build a mini estate in some of them. So, what's the challenges there?
Yeah, challenges there are areas of outstanding natural beauty are obviously largely around having or meeting what's known as exceptional design criteria. So you have to have a very robust justification for the reason for creating a further home in that type of setting and environment. So it is a more complex scenario, and it does take obviously a lot more consideration as to the viability and acceptability, and that type of consideration comes out in our pre-planning appraisal assessment that we undertake for our clients. But fundamentally, in those situations and in greenbelt scenarios, it's not a no, but we have to assess the strategy of how you would achieve a consent, and it largely does fall down onto creating what is known as a building of exceptional design quality.
So if you built something like an environmentally friendly passive house, you might have a chance.
That's exactly the type of thing that would stand the best chance possible of being considered of exceptional design quality.
For most people, as we said, it's people think about it. They've always wondered if, friends have always said, oh, you should do something with that land. You've got so much of it. Excuse me. These are the conversations that people often have. And we just say, well, run it over past us, put it over our desk. We'll have a look at it for you and give you a professional assessment as to the viability of planning and, more importantly, the value, and then just make a decision from there. So, we're open to see any kind of sensible plot of land, and if people want that free viability assessment, they can go to plot.Profit.com. And on the homepage there is the ability for them to submit their details and apply for a free viability evaluation.
Well, right, Andrew, it seems to me the client's got nothing to lose, have they?
No, absolutely not. And, it's about opening that conversation, giving an opinion, and then people can decide what they want to do and in their own timelines, whatever suits them. And I think also on the website, there's some great resources and tools there which explain the process in even more detail than we've discussed today, Steve. So, it'd be great for people to take a look at plot2profit.com, have a look around the site, get some more information and get in touch.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you for joining us today, and wish you well for the rest of the day, whatever you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
This is the Business Hour in partnership with Network B2B, helping you share your passion, knowledge, and make great connections. Like to share news about your business, event, seminar, or workshop? Simply email steve@stevetwynham.com.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast for business. If you would like to feature your business in Podcast for Business and the Business Hour podcast, I would love to hear from you. Simply email steve@stevetwynham.com. The Business Hour podcast is produced and presented by Steve Twynham. Copyright applies.